Hey everybody, Professor Dust here, and offering some feedback, guidance, whatever you want to call it, on your Module 1 discussions. Everybody did a good job in doing those readings and kind of putting together the pieces of the puzzle. And I wanted to offer kind of a visual of at least my view of how it's changed over time. I think it might be helpful in kind of connecting the dots on some of this information. And so you read three things. Number one, was more the details behind Turner's consulting engagement process. And again, there's all sorts of different processes. I would say that 10-step process, and Turner's description of it is really good. It's very user-friendly, and it's kind of the right level for getting a big picture of how it works. And then we also read a really classic article in Harvard Business Review about consulting being more than just giving advice, and understanding what's the point of consulting and why do they exist. And then we read the more recent article and talking about the disruption in the industry and how things have kind of changed, and talking about the role of technology and information accessibility at large. So wanted to offer a little visual to kind of help solidify what exactly is the difference. So this is the entity, and this is historically what entities have, right? They're answering questions, they have information in-house, and consulting firms more or less were out here, right? So here's this littler firm, and they have the ability to track down information. And this information's out here in the infosphere. There's things that they can figure out, right? So for example, in your research project, or for your consulting project, the capstone, right, you're being asked to go kind of track down some of this information about hard skills, soft skills, etc. And so the job of a consulting firm, still, sometimes this is still the model, and it's kind of representative of what you're doing. They go track down this knowledge and they feed it to the organization. And everybody's happy, right? It's because this organization, it didn't have the time, and it didn't maybe have the expertise, or didn't have the interest in tracking down that information or figuring something out. And that's still relatively prevalent today. And where it's headed, and what this article was talking about in terms of the cusp of disruption, is that, of course, again, there's organizations that still have their knowledge, and this organization that is the consulting firm, it's still out here, and they have the knowledge. They have some specific expertise. They've created intellectual property. They have developed a piece of technology. They've created relationships that nobody else has. A lot of times this might come down to consulting firms that do their own independent research. Companies like Gallup and McKinsey, they put out their own reports, and they invest a ton of money to prove that they are the expert, right? Which is a little bit different than up here, where essentially they're going out and getting it ad hoc. Instead, they're being proactive and finding it themselves, and then embedding themselves within the organization. So what ends up happening is that if it's done right, here's that organization, and the consulting entity is plugged in here with their intellectual property. So the organization still has things that they do and they know very well, but the goal is to become part of the system. And this is what you want in terms of long-term revenue and the ability to build that relationship so that it's easier to retain that client. You're not fighting over other people that could potentially do this, right? There might be 3, 4, 5 different entities that can do the same thing. And if essentially you have everybody that's capable of doing those things, then all of these companies are competing against one another. And they're all competing on price because they can essentially do the same thing. But if you develop this intellectual property and do something that nobody else can do, and you can embed yourself within the organization, you have a higher likelihood of maintaining that relationship. So instead of being more of like an outsourced firm, you are a firm that more or less becomes internal. And so, both of these models are still used, but I would say the bigger ones, they're trying to get into this space. And so that's the real differentiator. And I think everybody did a good job explaining that and showing that in the module write-up. And hopefully that's helpful in just kind of giving a high-level overview of where the industry is headed and where it's going. But of course, there's still some pretty classic approaches that are embedded. This idea of being the ones that have the information and ensuring that they're doing this trade-off of feedback between the client and what they find. I mean, that's all still relevant. That's still all the same. It's more or less just kind of changed from being external to internal for some entities. So hope that was helpful, and hope you guys enjoyed Module 1. Thanks.